We'll go ahead and start. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. If y'all recall from last time, we're going to kick it into second gear. We're going to continue where we left off in the story of Terah. If you remember, we started the story of the prehistory of the Bible. We had the father of humanity, Adam, and the father of the nations, Noah, and a descendant of Noah's son, Shem, was Terah. And if you look in the back of your slide, so slide 1 on the top there, you can just turn around your packet and you'll see the map. You'll see the Fertile Crescent. Okay, remember our Fertile Crescent from week 1. So we're going all the way where that H is his homeland near Babylon in Chaldea. And Terah travels with Abram and his son or his nephew Lot over to a region called Aram. And there, where that T is, that is Terah's place. And notice that it's named Haran. Who is Haran? Who remembers from last week? Who had the name Haran? It was Lot's deceased father, right? So Abraham's brother. So perhaps Haran and Haran, maybe Terah named the settlement after his lost son. So he stays there, he gains wealth, and then he dies. And then we're going to pick up in Genesis 12. If you have your Bibles with you, we're going to go from 12 and we're going to zip right through, okay? So Abram starts, he travels, he has a vision, he sees God, and God reveals to him in chapter 12 that he is going to be this great nation. His descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars. And so God sends him on his way and guides him to the land of Canaan. And remember, Canaan is not this big civilization. Think of it more like the Outback. Think of it like Texas before it was accepted in the Union, okay? So it's just this wild, wild west in Canaan. Different tribes are skirmishing for ground and pastoral land. And so Abram goes and travels here. He makes a few stops on his way. But as soon as he gets there, this famine strikes. And he's forced to travel to Egypt where there is civilization. So he goes to Egypt. And we'll hear this happen a few times, but in fear of protecting himself, he says that his wife Sarai is his sister and pass it on to Pharaoh. And for this, he's rewarded with livestock and servants, and assumingly Sarai will join in Pharaoh's harem. But this is not good for God because that is not his wife, right? That's not good. So God punishes Pharaoh, and Pharaoh angrily rebukes Abram and says, hey, why didn't you tell me this? So he gives Sarai back to Abram, and then they're off, and they leave back to Canaan with even more wealth. So now they're even wealthier at this point. Okay, so now we're back. He returns. If you go to your second slide, slide number 2 in the back of your packet, it's going to have a zoomed in image of Palestine, where Canaan is, okay? And so in this image, we're going to see that big A. Do you guys see the big A in the map? That is going to be kind of like our capital. That is our Chicago of Palestine at this time. So this is his main settlement where that blue A is in Hebron. And so Abram will settle there. Lot and his pastors get way too big. They have too many riches to share. So Lot decides he's going to leave Canaan and go south towards the Dead Sea. And if you see the Dead Sea on your map, it's right below it. So that's going to be Lot's main point. And that is a different region than Canaan. So this region is going to be one of Sodom. And Canaanites and Sodomites are rivals. And we're going to see this in what's called the Battle of Siddim. So this king from Canaan named Chedorlaomer, he is going to assemble a coalition of 4 different kings, and they're going to rival the king of Sodom in his army of 5 kings. I don't think of it as like Braveheart, like there's these huge armies. Think of it, again, like these native tribes that are skirmishing for land. So this is a much more low scale. There wasn't a professional standing army at this time. And so they go to battle, and Chedorlaomer just wipes them out, just totally routs them. And Lot is caught in the crossfire. So he gets captured. His possessions are looted by Chedorlaomer. And so Abram hears about this, and he has to go rescue him. So he goes up north a little bit to, if you know, a little up north to a place called Mamre. And so Mamre is controlled by an Amorite chieftain who he will befriend, and him and his brothers will assemble a small little militia of 318 tribesmen, and they're going to ambush Chedorlaomer and rescue Lot. And so they do, and Lot is rescued. They get all their possessions back, and the king of Sodom is so happy. He defeated Chedorlaomer for him, and he gets a blessing by this mysterious high priest named Melchizedek. And this is really the only time he's mentioned, but as you might know, he's mentioned again in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, so a bit of a mysterious figure, perhaps known as God's first high priest. Okay, so chapter 15, Abram has a vision. He has this vision of this strange request where God is asking him to take these animals to him, cut them in half, and mysteriously these two objects representing God, this torch and oven, levitate past the two halves of the animal. Okay, this is called a berit. So this is kind of a contractual agreement where someone who does this, who goes over these dead animals, represents an oath to that person. So strangely, Abram isn't the one going and making this oath. It's God putting the onus on him, making this oath to Abram. So back in the Bronze Age, this would have been a really big deal, showing that God is super dedicated to this promise he has. And then in chapter 16, we have the story of Sarai and Hagar. So Sarai is, after 10 years, they still haven't had children. You know, how is this great Abram, this great nation builder, going to have descendants without a child? And so Sarai decides to give over her Egyptian maidservant named Hagar, and she conceives. Sarai immediately regrets that decision, gets jealous of Sarai, and banishes her. And so Hagar is out to the road of Shur. So if you look on slide 1, that's going to be near Egypt on the Fertile Crescent, that peninsula in between Canaan and Egypt. So she's out there in the desert, and an angel there will comfort her and bring her a spring, okay? And so that is going to be, then she goes back, reconciles, and at the age of 86, they're going to conceive Ishmael, okay? At the age of 99, in chapter 17, Abram will be having another vision, the last vision, a third vision from God, where he is renamed. So he is not Abram anymore, now he is Abraham. So Abraham, which means father of the multitudes, will be renamed Sarah. Sarai will be renamed to Sarah. And God, again, symbolizes this covenant, once again, with circumcision. So circumcision is what's going to make Abraham apart as his chosen people. So after that, he circumcised Ishmael and his household. Okay, in chapter 18, now we're going to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. You might be familiar with this already, so we'll kind of go through this quickly. So you have these three travelers, and again, this is kind of strange. Genesis has a habit of making angels like people, like representative of God. So these three travelers represent angels, and Abraham is excited that he sees these travelers. He gets an extravagant meal, invites them to a tent, and the angels will bless him, promising a son for Sarah in the future. And so as they leave, they go down to Sodom, and God confronts Abraham, telling him that he has heard the cries of the Sodomites and their wicked ways, and so he's going to destroy them. And Abraham knows that Lot's there, so he's got to be like, oh no, like we can't let God destroy this place and endanger my nephew. So he's like, God, are you really going to wipe away this whole region? If there is just, 50 innocent people, okay, 20, okay, 15, okay, 10. So it goes all the way down to 10 in this negotiation. And God's like, yes, I'll agree. If there's 10 people, we will not destroy it. Okay, so those two travelers continue their way south towards Sodom, where the El is, where Lot is, and they encounter Lot. He invites him inside, and of course, as many of you know, the mob just storms his house, knocking on their door, demanding to have their way with these two angels. And Lot, being the great father that he is, says, no, take my virgin daughters instead, have your way with them. So great father he is. So After that, the mob isn't satisfied. They make fun of him for being a foreigner. And so they're about to just attack Lot until the angels will pull him in. He says, the angels reveal that, we're actually on a mission to come and destroy this region and these wicked people. And so he says, go and tell your people to go to the mountains and don't turn back. And so Lot tries to get his daughters, try to get the daughters' husbands, and the husbands think, what a kidder this Lot is. So they sleep in. And so he kind of dilly-dallies around for a little bit, and then finally the angels are like, all right, we're grabbing you, you're going outside the city. And so the angel says, go to the mountains, and Lot's kind of like, come on, guys, I'm out of shape. I'm getting a little bit older, I can't make it all the way over there in time by morning. So he's like, can I just go to this little village in Zoar? Can you spare that village? And the angels agree. So he goes to that village, and Sodom is just destroyed by fire and brimstone. This whole prosperous region on the Dead Sea is now just salted and infertile and completely annihilated. Okay, and so after that, Lot will go from Zoar and move into a cave with his two daughters. And with that, the two daughters, thinking that, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, how is humanity going to repopulate themselves, decide to have the great idea of inebriating their father and seducing him. And so from there, the older daughter will conceive a son named Moab, which you will hear a lot later in the Bible because he is the father of the Moabite tribe. And his the younger daughter has been Anami, and that is going to be the Ammonite tribe. And remember, it's Ammonite, not Amorite, so two different tribes there. Amorite's the native one. Ammonite is from Lot's bloodline. Okay, and so after this incident, Abraham will go into, leave Sodom. He'll see the destruction, and he'll move to Gerar and Beersheba, where King Abimelech is. So if you look on your back of your packet, it's where that K is. You'll see that K kind of west towards the coast. So think of this, Hebron is the capital. This is kind of like their summer home, okay? This is kind of their temporary settlement that they'll have. And so he goes, befriends Abimelech, and likewise, like he did in Egypt, he'll portray his wife Sarah as a sister. Abimelech confronts him again, but this time Abraham reveals that, in fact, she is Abraham's sister. So it's not mentioned in the genealogy in Genesis, but apparently Terah had another wife or another mistress and conceived Sarah, who became Abraham's wife. So that is revealed here. So after hearing that, Abimelech will restore Abraham and Sarah, and they agree again to fill him with riches and herds and land. And so he'll build all of these fountains and wells around the area. And then when he settles there, Isaac is finally born. And Sarah is jealous, worrying that Isaac will be snubbed out of the inheritance. She drives them away, but Abraham does so reluctantly, but God will tell him, hey, no, Ishmael's going to be okay. He's going to have his own nation. And so Ishmael is Hagar go out again to the Shur desert, and they're just out in the wilderness. And after a while, they run out of food and water, and Ishmael is just starving to death. He's crying, and Hagar will just lay him down and leave him for dead, sobbing, thinking this is it, this is the end. But in a twist of fate, an angel comes down, saves the day, the spring miraculously comes up, and Ishmael is revived, and God continues to bless him, and they get raised in the wilderness in Egypt as a hunter, and he will later go on to marry an Egyptian. Okay, so back to Abraham in Gerar. He is digging wells, and Abimelech's servants are jealous of Abraham getting all these good wells, good land, and so they go and try to steal it away from him. Abraham comes to him, talks it out, and Abimelech and them make a pact. And he will have a pact in this place where he has 7 wells, and he'll rename this place Beersheba. So if you look at that K on the east end, you'll see the location of Beersheba, which is, it means well of 7 or 7 wells. Okay, chapter 22 is the iconic story of the binding of Isaac. So Isaac, God puts Abraham to the test by making him sacrifice his son Isaac and bringing him to the mountain called Moriah. So he goes up, he goes with his servants, and when they get to Moriah, up to the hill, he leaves the servants and grabs the supplies, and Isaac and them go by themselves. And then Isaac is like, okay, we got everything, but where's the goat? Where's the sacrifice? And Abraham kind of solemnly says, well, God will provide. So with that note, they go up. And of course, Isaac is the sacrifice, so Isaac is binded on top of this mountain, and Abraham is about to slay him, but oh no, an angel swoops in, saves the day, and says, no, what are you doing? You've passed this test of your faith, and Abraham is rewarded and blessed, and instead they find this ram stuck in some thicket and bushes, and that ram becomes a sacrifice, and they celebrate. So afterwards, they rendezvous with the servants and they return back to Beersheba. Okay, chapter 23, it is now late in Sarah's and Abraham's life. Sarah passes away at the age of 127, and she returns back to, remember the capital, that A word, Hebron. So they go back to Hebron and wants to get a burial site for her. So Abraham negotiates with the leader, that is a Hittite territory, so he has to go to a guy named Ephron. They negotiate, he pays 400 shekels, which is a generous amount back in this time, and buys a cave called Machpelah, and that is going to be the burial site, the ancestral burial site for not just Sarah and Abraham, but also Isaac and Jacob will be buried there. So a very important location. All right, now our second story. All right, second of four stories. So our second story is focused on the story of Rebekah. So Abraham reaches old age. He wants his servants not to marry his son Isaac to these barbaric Canaanite people. He wants to go back to Syria where that T is in slide 1. He wants to make a journey there and go to the household of Nahor, which remember Nahor, Haran, and Abraham were the sons of Terah. Haran died and Nahor was the surviving brother. So he wants to marry someone from his uncle Nahor. So he goes and gets his servant to travel with 10 camels. They arrive back in Aram in Haran, and they go, and the servant is praying at the fountain. At evening time, the women will go and draw water. And so he's praying that God just, have your chosen woman come and, feed my camels and give them water. And whoever does that, that is the one God's chosen. And lo and behold, he lifts up his eyes after praying, and there's Rebekah feeding, giving water to his camels. And so the servant is excited. He gives all these riches and jewels. And Rebekah goes back, sees that the servants can spend the night at their father's house. And so they go, and Laban, who we'll see is very materialistic, is like, whoa, ooh, I like these jewelry. So he's like, let's welcome these travelers in here. So Laban is, giving the servant a big hug. The servant recalls the story of his prayer and how Rebekah was chosen. And Bethuel, the father of Rebekah, accepts that this sign is indeed of God, and he's willing to give Rebekah as a wife to Isaac. So afterward, they celebrate throughout the night, and the morning, the mom is like, okay, can she stay for 10 days? Do you mind just hanging out for a little bit? And the servant wants to leave now, and they ask Rebekah, but Rebekah is willing to leave now. So she departs with the servants back to where Isaac is, and Isaac is settled in Beer-lahai. So this is that back in the Shur Road on your slide 1, connecting to Egypt. So for whatever reason, Isaac is now settled in east of Egypt. And his servant brings out Rebekah. She wears this bride's veil. The servant updates everything on the story. And Isaac is just happy as can be. And he takes his new bride into his household, and they are married. All right, chapter 25, we have the last days of Abraham. So after Sarah passes away, Abraham will marry another wife named Keturah. And Keturah will give more sons to Abraham. And the son you want to keep in mind is a son named Midian. So Midian is going to be founder of the Midianites, another tribe that we're going to hear quite a bit. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because this is the tribe Moses will marry into, okay? All right, so Abraham passes away. Ishmael and Isaac will bury him, and then Ishmael will settle, go east of Egypt in the Sur Desert. And there he will have 12 sons who will be 12 tribes. Interestingly enough, we don't really hear about these 12 tribes of Ishmael that much. That is all that's mentioned in the Bible. All right, so chapter 25, 19 through 34, where Rebekah will give birth to twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau is famously having his ankle grabbed by Jacob, and so this will be symbolic for later. Isaac favors Esau, his firstborn. Rebekah will favor Jacob. Esau is more of a manly man. He's very hairy. He's outdoorsy. He goes and hunts, while Jacob is more of a homebody. He, cooks. He helps out the mom. So Rebekah takes a liking to Jacob. Okay, so one day Esau is going out on a hunt. He's famished. And Jacob is making the stew, and famously Esau is like, oh my gosh, I'm literally starving to death, brother, give me some of that stew. And Jacob's like, okay, I will, but can I just get that birthright? And Esau's like, are you serious? And Jacob is like, yes. And so hesitantly Esau gives up his birthright for the stew. Okay, so after the famine hits in the desert, Isaac decides to, instead of going to Egypt, he goes back to Canaan, back to Gerar. Remember, kind of their summer home of Abraham, so they're back in that cave territory. He again counters that king Abimelech and does the same thing. He passes Rebekah off as his wife, or as his sister, instead of his wife. But in this variation, Abimelech kind of sees through the window that they're touching each other the wrong way. And so he confronts them, and he reveals that Rebekah is in fact Isaac's sister. And so he gives him gifts, gives him land, and Isaac prospers as a great farmer. So he becomes wealthy in the land and inherits Abraham's wells that he became prosperous with. Okay? So the locals are again just jealous of Isaac, just like they were jealous of Abraham and his wells. So they just dig dirt into the wells so to make it, no one's able to use it. So Isaac, being very non-confrontational, instead of confronting him about it, he just decides to go to build another well somewhere else. And he builds an altar. He goes to Beersheba, back where the 7 wells are, builds an altar, and Abimelech reconciles with him, saying, so sorry for these people messing up your wells. Let me partake an oath with you, the same that I gave to your father Abraham. Okay, so they end with that pact, and then the chapter ends with Esau marrying Judith the Hittite, which, again, remember, Esau's not supposed to be marrying the locals or the natives, so this will kind of come back to haunt him as Rebekah gets mad at him for this. Okay, so chapter 27, Isaac is reaching old age, his eyes are getting dim, and he tells his oldest son Esau, go fetch me a meal so you can prepare for me as I give you my blessings before I part from this world. And so he goes on a hunt, but Rebekah overhears this, and she comes up with a scheme like, no, I want my Jacob to get this blessing. So he goes, gets Jacob because he's so, smooth-skinned and you could never pass for Esau. She dresses him up in his hunting outfit, gives a coat skin and put it on so his arms are nice and hairy. And, he goes back to Isaac with a meal that Rebekah gave to him, and he gives it to Isaac. And even though Isaac is like, whoa, this is, what a fast turnaround. That was a quick meal. And, you sound a little bit like Jacob, but it's good enough where Isaac gives a blessing to Jacob anyway. So Jacob gives the blessing Isaac gives the blessing to Jacob. And right when he turns around, in comical timing, Esau is returning, the meal prepared, like, all right, Dad, I'm ready for that blessing. And Isaac is just perplexed. He's like, oh my goodness, no. He realized what has happened and that he was tricked. And Esau is just sobbing. He's like, no, can you do a redo? Can you do just another one? Isaac is like, no, you must be your brother's servant. And so Esau is devastated. He is plotting revenge. And so Rebekah gets wind of this, and she says, go to Aram, back where Terah's homeland was, and go get a wife there, and get protection there too, because Esau is going to come after you. So Jacob is off. He leaves. And now we are in the story of Jacob, starting in chapter 28. So Jacob goes back up north to Terah, all the way in Syria, and on his way there, he rests at a place and finds like this nice comfortable stone for a pillow. And so he lays down on the stone and he gets this strange dream. So God comes to him, Jacob, for the first time and gives him a dream of this ladder, or more accurately, the Hebrew says like a ramp, where angels are coming up and down, traversing heaven and earth, and God stands beside Jacob and tells him, reaffirms the promise that he had to Abraham, that he is going to be the one to inherit this great promise that Abraham had. And so Jacob wakes up, he is ecstatic, he's like, oh my goodness, I am so excited, let me make a pillar and name this place Beth-El, which means house. Beth is house, El is God, so Bethel means house of God. So that is where Bethel gets its name, from the stone that Jacob dedicates. Okay, so Jacob continues his journey up north. He finally reaches Laban's house. He arrives, he finds 3 shepherds, and he asks for the house of Nahor. And there, on the way, he finds this attractive shepherdess of the house of Nahor named Rachel. Rachel is coming out to feed her flock at the well. Famously, Jacob is just love-struck. Cupid just struck him with an arrow, and he gets the might of 10 men. And you have the stone wells, you have this big circle that protects the well cover, this lid. Man, he just moves that well cover and able to feed Rachel's flock. So he is just motivated. He comes, he kisses and sobs at Rachel, telling his story of why he escaped to his homeland and to marry a daughter of the household of Nahor. So they go to Rachel's father, which happens to be Laban, the brother of Rebekah. And so Jacob decides to work for Laban as an agreement for a bride's price. And he says, 7 years of labor. If you agree with that, she's yours. So he goes, he works for 7 years, and they host this great feast. But what famously happens after they go into the wedding tent? Laban does the old switcheroo. So his oldest daughter, Leah, has not yet married, so he wants to marry off his older daughter first. And so he does a switcheroo. He switches out Rachel for Leah, and so he is now married to Leah in Jacob's household. And so Jacob is like upset about this, but what's done is done. And Laban's like, okay, just marry, or just work for me another 7 years. Then I promise you'll get Rachel. And so Jacob agrees. And it says in the text that Jacob loved Rachel more. And for this reason, God opened the womb of Leah. And so getting down, you'll see we finally have the 12 tribes, the descendants of Jacob. So Leah will bear him Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And Rachel is jealous of this, so becomes barren. But she decides to give Jacob her maidservant Bilhah, and Bilhah will give Jacob Dan and Naphtali. Leah stops conceiving children and decides to give Jacob her maidservant Zilpah. And so Gad and Asher will be brought. And then Leah will conceive again, bringing Issachar, Zebulun, and a daughter, his one daughter named Dinah. And then finally, God heeds Rachel. And Rachel gets over her barrenness and bears Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob. So Jacob, after Joseph is born, Jacob requests to leave, but Laban gives him, hey, if you give me, I'll give you all this money. If you just stay another 6 years, if you stay another 6 years, Jacob, I will get you more wealth. But instead of wealth, Jacob agrees, but he says, I just want the flock with the speckled spots. So speckled spots were like, they're impure, they're blemished. So he thinks, oh man, I'm going to get a great deal. All the shepherds or all the sheep I don't want, I can just give it over to Jacob. But what Jacob does is he's like a master breeder of these flocks. And so what he does is that he intentionally breeds all the babies to be speckled. And then by that, he will then take all of the flock of Laban, all the newborn flock will be Jacob's instead of Laban. So Laban's sons get wind of this. They are mad at Jacob. And so Jacob's like, oh man, I got to get out of here. I really got to get out. So he goes to Rachel and says, I need to escape. So they go, they agree, and they sneak away. 3 days later, Laban gets word of this and goes, chases them and pursues them. Laban will catch up to them. If you know the story of this missing idol, it's kind of funny. So you have this story where Laban is searching for this idol, this god that he has, and Rachel has it hidden. So he checks every tent, and when he reaches Rachel's tent, she's sitting on it and he can't find it. And Rachel's like, oh, I can rise to help you, but it's that time of the month. So she decides not to help, and so it remains hidden, which is kind of a funny story. And afterwards, Laban does a symbolic pact with Jacob, and they make a pillar over in Galilee. If you look on your map, it's kind of in the west of slide 2 where you see the Jabbok River circled. This is where Gilead is, and this will be the point where they will have an agreement of boundaries. Okay, so at Gilead near Jabbok, Jacob will send a messenger to Esau to reconcile. And so the messenger goes out to Esau and returns, saying Esau would love to meet with you, but he's also bringing 400 of his good friends with him. And so Jacob hears about this, and he's like, I don't know about this 400 friends. So Jacob is afraid. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to just bribe my way to reconcile with my brother if he's sending an army. So he gets all these wagons and caravans of treasures just to go one by one, bringing it to Esau to hopefully reconcile with him to make things better. And so as he's doing this, his family is crossing the Jabbok River. And once they all escape, he's left behind, and suddenly this man just comes out of nowhere and just tackles him. And this man, of course, is an angel. And so this angel and Jacob are wrestling and, attacks Jacob on his hip socket. But Jacob will overcome this angel and wrestles him, and he says, I'm not going to let go until you bless me. The angel famously will rename Jacob Israel, meaning one who struggles with God, and he will rename that place Pino, which means face of God. So the Jabbok River right there is going to be named Pino. So after that, Esau will arrive. He has his entourage with him, and Jacob is just nervous. He's like, what is he going to do? Is he going to kill me? What's going to happen? And so Esau confronts him, and it's a surprise. He just runs up, hugs him, kisses him, wants to make up with him, and they catch up. He invites him to, him and his family come to Seir and have a settlement with him. This is kind of funny. Jacob is like, oh, my flock they just have too much. We'll let you, we'll catch up. We'll catch up. So he tells Esau to go, and Esau goes. And of course, Jacob is not going with Esau is going, so he goes west instead. And he'll go eventually to a place called Shechem. It's on your map in slide 2. You'll see above Abram, there is Shechem. So Jacob and his family settle there. There we get the story of Dinah and Shechem. So they're settled among the Hivites. This chief named Hamor is over that village. And so Dinah is talking with the local town ladies. And then all of a sudden she's assaulted by this guy named Shechem and taken advantage of. And Shechem demands from his father that you make this woman his wife. And so Jacob hears about this. The brothers are outraged that their only daughter has been defiled. And so the brothers are very upset. Hamor pleads with Jacob, please, we can have diplomatic relationships. You'll get holding of the land if only you give me your daughter Dinah for my son. Jacob is like, no, you uncircumcised barbarians. After that, Hamor decides to just circumcise everybody to make it up with Jacob. But Simeon and Levi, on the other hand, are not having up any of it. So they're thirsty for blood and vengeance. 3 days later, they get their swords, and they just slaughter Hamor and his family and rescue Dinah from their household, and they just plunder the land. And Jacob is looking at them like, are you guys serious? What did you guys do? This is terrible. Now all of these Canaanite tribes are gonna, the natives are gonna unite against us, and we're gonna be odious to the people. And so they have to flee before the tribes get wind of this. So God instructs Jacob to go back to Bethel where he had that vision of the ladder. And he promises them that they're going to go, you kind of get an allusion to Egypt and suffering, but then they'll be back into this homeland at some point. So there's kind of foreshadowing going on there. And from there, on their way there, Deborah dies in Bethel and is buried. And on the trip down south, Rachel's bearing a second son named Benjamin, so Benjamin is being born, but unfortunately during her childbirth, Rachel actually dies giving birth to Benjamin. So Jacob is upset, and we'll see how precious this Benjamin is. But Rachel is buried on the road, and this road is called Bethlehem, and I'm sure that's going to be a location you're going to want to know about later on in the story. So Bethlehem is named after Rachel, where Rachel died. Okay, so Jacob finally arrives back at Hebron, where our capital is, our capital settlement. And there Isaac will pass, and he is going to die and be buried along with Abraham, his father, and his mother Sarah. Okay, and now we're getting to our last story, the story of Joseph. Okay, so remember, Joseph is this daddy's boy, the oldest son of his beloved Rachel, the wife that he loved so much. And they are settled in Hebron. And there Joseph has a reputation for being a tattletale. The brothers just despise him. And to make things worse, he has this vision. He has two visions. The first vision he brags to his brothers about that, they both had bundled stalks of wheat, and his stalks were bigger, and the brothers' stalks bowed low to him, and that the brothers did not take that so well. And then there's a second vision where he talks to Jacob this time, and he has this vision of the sun and the moon, which represented his dad and his mom, and the 11 stars that represented his brothers were all bowing low to Joseph. And Jacob was like, what are you doing, son? Like, his arrogance was just intolerable. So the brothers got even madder after this. So one day, Jacob is sent off to Shechem. So remember up north to Shechem, where the story of Dinah was. So they go up there to tend to some flocks. A resident says that, oh no, they're no longer in Shechem, they're actually in Dothan. So Dothan is this wilderness even further out where no one is, where, if something bad happened, perhaps there would be no witnesses. So they're over in Dothan. Joseph meets them there, and while they're there, the brothers are plotting. The brothers are like, man, we are going to get even. We're going to kill this brother. So they plot to kill him. And Reuben, being the nice guy, he's like, hey guys, let's not kill him. Come on, let's just throw him in a pit. Let's just tear out his robe and throw him in a pit and see what happens. So that's what they do. They assault Joseph, strip him of his ordinated tunic that Jacob gave him, and throws him into a pit where he'll assumingly starve to death. So after that, what else would they do but to celebrate with a meal, right? These callous brothers are having a meal, and as they're having a meal, these merchants are coming that are on their way to Egypt. And Judah comes up with the idea of, hey, instead of killing him, let's make the most of him. Let's at least sell him for something. So they decide, instead of letting him die in the pit, that they would sell their brother Joseph into slavery for a measly 20 shekels of silver. So their brother goes down to Egypt, and that is where he becomes property of a prominent courier of Pharaoh named Potiphar. Okay, again, chapter 38, just like I said, it's a whole nother story that's a whole nother, is a completely different direction that breaks kind of the flow of where we're going. So we're going to discuss that at our Zoom class on Monday at 7. So please sign up if you're able to come to that. So continuing our story in chapter 39, Joseph is in Potiphar's house. He ascends the ranks. He becomes like his model servant, gaining his trust with all of his possessions. And then, of course, Joseph has the downside of just being gosh darn good looking. So Potiphar's wife is like, man, she's just lusting over this Joseph fella. And the wife is like trying to force him to lay with her. And Joseph was like, no, I could never compromise the trust of my master. So Joseph, being the good guy that he is, doesn't fall for it. But man, Potiphar's wife is just reckless. And one day they're alone, and she just strips him of his clothing. And Joseph is scared. He screams and he runs outside naked. And she just screams and screams and says, oh my gosh, this Joseph took advantage of me. Here's the proof. Here's the clothing. So she frames Joseph, and now Joseph is forced to go to jail. So Potiphar sends him to prison, and still there God is with him. So even at the jail, he is promoted, and he is in charge of all of these prisoners. Okay? So two notable prisoners that he's in charge of are close confidants of Pharaoh. So he's going to be in charge of his baker and also his cupbearer. And one day, these two inmates will come to Joseph with a dream. And he's like, oh, can you interpret this dream for me? And Joseph, so the cupbearer goes first, and he tells Joseph of this dream where there's these 3 branches. And they were sprouted these ripened grapes. And he took these grapes and put it in Pharaoh's cup. And so Joseph is like, these 3 branches represents 3 days that the bear will be pardoned by Pharaoh, and he'll serve him again. And Joseph said on a side note, hey, by the way, after that 3 days, can you, send in a good word for me? Like, I'm wrongfully imprisoned. I need to be free. I need to go back to Canaan. And the cupbearer is like, yeah, sure. And of course, he never does. So the baker's dream is next. The baker's dream is a little bit more bad. So the baker has a dream of these 3 baskets on his head with white bread, and birds come down and start eating from the baskets. And Joseph says that the dream is 3 days. The 3 baskets represent 3 days that he will be executed and eaten by birds. So that's a great interpretation. So 3 days later, what do you know? It just so happens to be Pharaoh's birthday. And in Pharaoh's birthday, he decides to pardon the cupbearer, and he decides to execute the baker, just like Joseph's dream came true. So years and years passed by, and the cupbearer completely forgot about Jacob, and Pharaoh is having this bad dream. He's having this reoccurring dream where these 7 healthy cows or calves and these 7 sickly calves are eating the healthy ones, and then again, these 7 healthy grains are eating, or the healthy grains are being eaten up by these 7 scorched grains. And he's like, what is up with this dream? So he goes, he talks to his magicians, all the people from Egypt. And the cupbearer is like, oh, wait a second. There was this guy in prison. He might be able to figure this out. So he goes, he recruits Joseph to see if he can figure out this dream. And what do you know? Joseph nails it. He says, okay, these 7 sickly, cows' grains, that's going to represent 7 years of famine that's going to happen. But before then, there's going to be 7 years of prosperity. So these 7 sturdy cows, or these 7 healthy grains, that represents 7 years we're going to just have a surplus of a boundary. So he advises, hey, store up all of these grains now, so when that famine comes, we're going to be able to look out for ourselves and protect it. So he recommends having an administrator look after the surplus and keep it stored and distribute it whenever the famine hits. And what do you know? Pharaoh's like, hey, why don't you do that, Joseph? That's a great idea. Why don't you go ahead and do that? So at the age of 30, Joseph becomes a satrap, or a governor of Egypt, and he basically becomes like a co-ruler or the operation managers of Egypt. And so, he has a huge upgrade of responsibility. Pharaoh gives him a signet ring. He gives him clothes. He gives him a wife from Egypt named Asenath, and Asenath will bear him 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim. And so finally the prosperity happens in 7 years, and now finally the famine hits. And then it will hit not only Egypt, but where? Canaan too, back in Jacob's home country. And so Jacob and his sons are facing the famine and are forced to go to Egypt to buy grain from Egypt, because that's now the only location where you can get grain. So they go and they make a trip over there, and they see that Jacob is Pharaoh's representatives over the grain. And so they're going there. They're like, here's our money, dear leader, please help us. And of course, they don't know that Joseph is now, second in command of Egypt. And so they don't recognize them, and Joseph recognizes the brothers, though. And so he wants to test them to see if they've changed at all. So instead of giving them the grain, they're like, hey, wait a second. You guys are spies. You're trying to spy out Egypt. You Canaanite, traitors are going to betray us. And the brothers are like, no, we would never do that. And so they come to an arrangement where they will get the son Benjamin to bring back as collateral to prove that they are actually loyal to Egypt. So Joseph makes this arrangement where one brother will come in collateral and stay in the guardhouse, and Simeon is chosen, and the rest of the brothers will go and take the grain back to Jacob and bring back Benjamin to get back Simeon. So the brothers go, they load up the grain, take it to their father Jacob, but Joseph will secretly give the money back and stuff it back into the bags of the brothers. And the brothers on their way see this, are like, oh my gosh, we're going to be in so much trouble. But anyways, they return back. Jacob, of course, does not want to give up Benjamin, the precious son, the son that Rachel died giving birth to. He would be heartbroken if anything happened to Benjamin. But after a while, the resources thin out, and Judah convinces him, okay, let's bring Benjamin. And if Benjamin dies, man, my heart's going to just give out. So they agree to send them back with Benjamin, and the father Jacob is like, hey, bring double the money, bring double all the money that you can. So they go back, they bring the money, they bring Benjamin, and Joseph is just ecstatic. He invites them to a big lunch at noon at his palace, and during that, they eat, they celebrate, and the next morning, Joseph instructs them, sends them off on their way, but instructs the person to, give their money back again, stuff their money bag. But he has another plot, though. He's going to try to frame Benjamin. He's going to put Pharaoh's cup into Benjamin's bag and frame him and bring them back. So the brothers leave. The servant goes and chases them, saying, hey, we're missing the cup of Pharaoh. They discover it in Benjamin's bag. Now they're like, oh my gosh, Benjamin, you are dead meat. So they see that Benjamin is guilty of this. They send him back. They plead with Joseph, mercy, satrap, spare us. And Joseph is like, you know what, just leave the boy Benjamin here. He is the one that did wrong and will punish you guys. Just go off and have your grain and don't worry about him. And then famously, Judah steps up and says, no, take me instead of Benjamin. And then after that, Joseph just breaks down in tears. He is so sad. And he just finally reveals himself. He tells him the story. And the brothers are just shocked. Like, how can this slave, my enslaved brother now become this grand satrap of Egypt? And so they're shocked. And Joseph is like, no, what you meant for harm, God did for good. And so they reunite. He says, no, go and get your father Jacob and come here. We'll give you the best region of Egypt named Goshen. We'll have plentiful flocks and all the land we can have, all the grain we could eat. And so they go to Pharaoh to get permission for them to go get Jacob. And Pharaoh's so excited. So they get this, nice Egyptian guard all the way back to Hebron, bringing Jacob. At first, Jacob is like in disbelief. He's like, what? Joseph is alive after all this. So he doesn't believe him. And then he starts seeing these jewelries and exotic stuff that Pharaoh gave to him. And he's like, oh my gosh, maybe he is alive. So they go and reunite. And Jacob is taken back to Egypt. And so Joseph meets him in Goshen, and then they just reunite. They're just so sad and so happy to see each other. And Jacob tells Joseph that he can finally die happy and at peace, knowing that his son had always been alive. Okay, so Joseph then goes to Pharaoh and introduces his father Jacob to him, and Pharaoh is just so happy. We get in chapter 47, verses 13 through 26, we just see how groundbreaking Joseph's leadership was. Pretty much during the famine, Joseph was able to gain, in exchange of temporary grain, he was able to leverage that for land. And after Pharaoh assembled all this land, he was able to lease it out and to capable farmers, and these farmers will give them 1/5 of all their grain. So Pharaoh and Egypt were just making bank because of everything Joseph did. So Pharaoh is just so in gratitude to Joseph and all that he did. So they get this land, and they're pretty much live there happily ever after. In chapter 48 and 50, the last two chapters of Genesis, we hear Joseph's two sons are introduced to Jacob. And as Jacob is on his deathbed, he blesses him. And just like Jacob himself was blessed as a younger brother, he blesses his younger son, Ephraim, over Manasseh. So the author seems to be pointing us that perhaps Ephraim will be our next protagonist of the story, but we'll see how that pans out. So Ephraim is blessed. Jacob sings the Song of the 12, bids them farewell. And then after that, he passes away. So Jacob is now dead. He's embalmed with all this wealthy, technology in Egypt to preserve his body. And all of Egypt wept for 70 days over this great satrap's father that passed away. So Pharaoh gives them permission to leave back to Hebron, to Jacob's homeland. And again, he gives them the whole 9 yards, a military escort all the way there. They do a 7-day funeral service, and they finally return. And Joseph's brothers are in fear now because Jacob is gone, and thinking, oh my gosh, we have to make it up to Joseph. Let's tell him that Jacob's dying wish was that they forgive him. Okay, so whether that happened or not, it's not clear in Genesis, but that's what they tell Joseph. And so Joseph reacts. Joseph is being fawned on. They're throwing themselves to him. They're like, no, let me be your slave, Joseph. And then fulfilling the first vision, right? So Joseph finally famously replies that what you intended for harm, God had intended for good. And Genesis ends with an epilogue. Joseph is passing after a prosperous 110 years. So he has a happy ending. And his dying wish before he dies is to go back to Canaan and be buried there. So at the very end of Genesis, he is buried, and his coffin is now in Egypt. And next week, we'll find out what happens after the time of Joseph's generation and see what happens. Again, hope you guys can come to our Zoom meeting. I'll go ahead and post week 3 notes online. I really implore you to go to week 2's notes. This is a really shallow summary of everything, so please check out those notes if you want more details. And we'll do more discussion Monday, and we'll have either today or Monday, I'll have the week 3 notes ready for you, okay? So let's end it with prayer. Father God, we are just so excited to hear your story of the patriarchs Abraham and his famous promise, Lord. Father, that carries on to us through your son Jesus. Father, we are just so just craving to learn more about your word, to understand the stories of the Old Testament, Father. So I pray that we can just follow along your story, Lord, see the significance and relevance that it has in our lives today. And Father, as we continue next week with the story of Exodus, Lord, can you give us guidance and assurance and Father, just an understanding of your word and how it relates to us today, Father, and how we can pass on and continue that mission of your will, Father. And we pray all this in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Thank you, guys.